Tonight on Free Minds TV, talk show host Ian Freeman threatened with jail time for reporting on and having an opinion about some marijuana activism, also going to jail and facing huge fines for using or providing people with some plastic bags, banning books from children, and nationalizing banks in Europe. All that and a whole lot more tonight on Free Minds TV. And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV. As always, it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Now we are going to start off tonight talking about Ian Freeman. We have a whole lot of national news to get to, but we've been covering the Ian Freeman case on the show for quite a while. It all started back, I think, in the fall or maybe even the summer. It was a while back. Started with the couch enforcer, Ian Freeman from talk radio show Free Talk Live, as well as freekeen.com. He moved to Keene for some activism as part of the Free State Project. When he moved here, his tenants from the house that he bought, the tenants who were living there, had a couch in their front lawn, and the city of Keene decided, no, you can't have a couch in your lawn, it looks bad. So the code enforcement knocked on his door and gave him a fine and told him to remove the couch. Ian said, well, it's not even my couch, it's my tenant's couch, and if they want to have it in the lawn to do whatever they want there, it's been there a couple of years, who's it's bothering? It's not the city of Keene's property. What are you going to do about it? I'm going to just leave it there. Well, the city of Keene dragged him into court. He was then given 90 days, 93 days actually, in jail for failing to sit too quickly, or not saying Simon Says to the judge or whatnot, however you want to call it. They threw him in the clink. 3 days later, he begged for mercy and the judge let him out. But he's back in hot water. He's in the news again because, well, he's a member of the press and he was reporting on some things.
Right, so Ian, basically, he did get out of jail, but he's got a 90-day suspended sentence hanging over his head. Now, when they give you a suspended sentence, essentially, if you commit a crime within a certain period of time, usually it's 6 months or a year, during that time, they'll impose what's left of your sentence. So in Ian's case, he served 3 days on 93. There are 90 days out there. So what they're trying to do is basically impose that suspended sentence and put him in jail for 90 days.
Now, let's see, what's the crime, the new crime that Ian has committed now that he's a free man right now, sort of a free man, but apparently that doesn't mean that as a member of the press, he has a talk show that he does 6 nights a week, Monday through Saturday. He also blogs at freekeen.com. He likes to report on different activism that's going on, and he reported, as did we on Free Minds TVS, a number of news shows reported on Andrew Carroll's civil disobedience, which he carried out a couple of weeks ago here in Keene, New Hampshire on Railroad Square. What Andrew did is he simply held some marijuana to show that, look, I'm not hurting anyone by holding this plant. I don't intend to smoke it. I don't even smoke marijuana, but the laws against it are ridiculous. So I'm going to hold this plant and show that I'm going to get arrested and thrown in jail. And the only person who's hurt by the plant is me because of the laws against it. I'm going to be arrested, and he was, as an act of civil disobedience. Well, like him or hate him for that, whatever your opinion is, should reporting on that be considered a crime? Ian Freeman has been served by the court and must appear in front of the court, at least if they get their way, for committing this crime of reporting on the event, blogging about the event, and having Andrew on his radio show, Free Talk Live, and interviewing him about the event. Right,
and they're citing a New Hampshire law, which essentially they're trying to make it sound like this law prohibits you from reporting on a criminal act, an act of civil disobedience. Basically, if you're supportive of somebody breaking the law, even if it's as an act of civil disobedience or as an act of symbolic speech, what they're trying to say is you've aided and basically assisted in committing that crime. You've contributed to somebody else's unlawful behavior. But that has serious implications for the First Amendment. If you're reporting on a crime and you don't think what that person did is wrong, and you say that, are you an accomplice to that crime, or are you expressing your opinion like you're supposed to be able to do in America?
And are we now facing similar charges for reporting on it too and having an opinion? Does media not have to be biased? Can we only have one kind of media and it's what the government thinks we should have? Maybe you don't like the opinions on Free Minds TV, but should we go to jail for having them? That's essentially what the court is saying. If we're reporting on something and having an opinion on it, and the city of Keene or the state of New Hampshire, whatever it is, has a different opinion, should we go to jail for it? Where's the First Amendment? I mean, not only is it protected by the federal government in the First Amendment, but the New Hampshire Constitution has a similar clause in it protecting free speech and freedom of the press. And how far are they willing to go with this? Ian, so far, along with Sam from the Obscured Truth Network, have put together a response to this and a motion to squash this matter with the court, and we'll be hearing back from them. But even so, how much time should he be put into this? And will he be going back to jail for it? This is ridiculous. This is America. And we're threatening people with jail, possibly putting people in jail for having an opinion on something and reporting on it? Where is the freedom of the press? This is something I'd expect out of China or something where they don't have a constitution. Have we forgotten the Constitution so much that we're getting rid of freedom of the press? This is ridiculous. I know, the Fourth Amendment, that's been gone for a while, and that's number 4 anyways. But can't we at least keep number 1? Give me a break. How free is this country? Yeah,
and the other thing, if you actually read the paperwork that Ian received, which I think you can see up at freekeen.com, I believe he has an actual copy of that up on the website. Basically what the city is trying to say, or the prosecutor's office, they're trying to say that they can impose a suspended sentence for bad behavior. Is it bad behavior to have an opinion that they don't like on a matter like civil disobedience? Because essentially what they're trying to say, apparently the New Hampshire Supreme Court ruled that you don't actually have to be convicted of a crime, but a preponderance of the evidence can show that you've been doing something wrong, and then they can impose a suspended sentence. Well, should the law really be taking a stand on what political speech is correct and what political speech is incorrect?
Absolutely not. We live in America. It's supposed to be the land of the free, and this is absolutely disgusting, and I hope the Keene Police Department is feeling very foolish. You've got egg all over your face, Mr. Eli Rivera. I know you're a very nice man in person, but this disgusts me.
Yes.
Anyways, if you want more on this, we will be reporting on it, but we also had Ian on our show for 45 minutes on Free Minds Radio, which you can catch. The archive is on our website at freemindstv.com. Check it out if you want to hear more. And of course, we will be reporting on what comes out of this. But for now, we must move on because there's important matter in the works. The federal government, well, with all their power, they're sending down some new edicts. This time, well, it's still to keep the children safe, but it might cost libraries and bookstores and a lot of people a whole lot of money. The new federal law that will be going into effect February 6th is going to be banning all lead from any product that a child under 12 years old, 12 or under, may come in contact with. Now, you might say, well, that's a great idea. Lead's bad for you. Why should children be touching lead? Yeah, it's probably not a good idea to touch lead. But how far do we want to go on this? Now, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of books have lead in them. They have lead in the binding of the book a little bit, and even in the ink that they use. This law will be going after libraries to test each and every book on the shelf to make sure there's no traces of lead in them if they're going to be allowing children 12 and under into the libraries. Now you say, well, it's still a good idea. I mean, it'll cost us a little money, but at least the children will be safe. How much money is this going to cost? Well, it looks like critics, at least, of this new law are saying that it's going to be costing $300 to $600 per book to test, and most of the books will be destroyed in the process of testing them. So we can test the book, it's safe, but it's destroyed, so we can't put it back on the shelf, and it costs us $600 to test. Great idea, federal government. You're always thinking, how much is it going to cost to keep a library open and kids coming into it after February 6th? I mean, how many books are in a library? Tens of thousands, right? And you can't allow kids to have access to this book unless each and every single book has been tested for lead at a cost of $300 to $600 per book.
It seems like it'd be cheaper just to buy new lead-free books.
Oh, especially because the testing destroys most of the books that they test. So you get a book that's lead-free, well, that's great, but it's destroyed, so you can't really put it back on the shelf. The federal government at work, Nick.
It probably sounded like a very good idea when they didn't read the bill and then voted on it.
It's for the children, man. It's for the children. I mean, we got to do anything we can to protect the children, including keeping them out of libraries, out of bookstores, out of anything that could cause them harm. In fact, you know what I propose? We put a little straitjacket on them and throw them right in a rubber room as soon as they can walk. You know, they'd be protected from anything. They couldn't stub their toes. They couldn't experience any of the hardships of life. What we need to do is cage them and put them in padded rooms where they can't hurt themselves. It's for the children, Nick.
Yeah, that's only a little bit more ridiculous than this law, but this law is pretty ridiculous when you think about the number of books in the library, the cost to test all of them, even if this estimate is 2 or 3 times as high what it'll actually cost. Maybe they come up with a great new test, or maybe the critics are just, they're giving a high estimate. Even if it would cost $100 a book, think about how many books are in your average city library. There are tens of thousands of books in there. There's no way to test them all.
As well as the books in a bookstore. I mean, bookstores are going to either have to test all their books, make sure they're lead-free, or ban children 12 and under from coming in.
And I think what will essentially happen in reality is that if this law is actually enforced, they are just going to ban children because the testing is not practical and it's not economical, so they'll just ban children from libraries or other places where books are around.
Now, one thing you mentioned here that I think is very important and a huge piece of this is, well, it probably sounded like a good idea when they were voting on the bills before they read it, which is huge because, let's face it, the fools in Washington, they're not reading those laws.
Well, before they read it implies that they read it. They probably never read it.
Right,
they never read it at all, most likely, or not all of it.
They have no idea what they voted on. They had no idea that they essentially banned kids from going into libraries. They're clueless to that because they just show up and vote. They don't actually read these bills. And that's something that Downsize DC is pushing for. It's something that we do in the Downsizer Dispatch. Let's read the laws before we vote on them. Let's have one law at a time. And tonight's is a little bit special. Tonight's Downsizer Dispatch, coming at you weekly, having to do with actually writing the laws that they pass and Write the Laws Act. Nick, tell us a little bit more about this and specifically why it's on the Downsizer Dispatch this week.
Well, Read the Bills Act is probably the most popular campaign. In fact, I know it's the most popular campaign on downsizedc.org. Essentially, that's calling for Congress to read all of the bills that they vote on before they vote on them. And it would require each congressman to either read the legislation or have it read to them by a clerk before they voted on it. Well, the Write the Laws Act is a little bit different, but it kind of addresses the same thing. Basically, the Congress doesn't pass all of the laws that you have to follow. It never goes to a vote. Basically, they delegate authority to a bunch of different alphabet soup agencies like the FDA, the FTC, the ATF, and a whole bunch of others. And there's a few examples in recent news that are coming out where regulatory agencies probably went overboard. A lot of Americans would have liked to have had a say in these new rules, except they're rules, not laws, even though you go to jail if you don't follow them. So your elected representatives never voted on these ideas. The FDA just decided to ban Ceravent and Foradil for asthma patients. There are a couple of drugs that are used to treat asthma, even though a third of the experts on the panel disagree with banning them, and the main reason to ban them was because a lot of people don't use them correctly. You have to take them in conjunction with a steroid. Well, you can say that those drugs are dangerous, even though the studies are kind of flawed because they're looking at everybody, not the people who actually are responsible and take their medicine correctly. Problem is, the other two drugs that are available, Advair and Symbicort, there are two other drugs, more expensive. Poor people are now going to have to pay more because of this rule. And if people are using the original drugs correctly, there's no evidence that it will make any difference. Also, they wanted to ban all four, but they kind of backed off of that. The FDA also banned the use of CFC inhalers, that stuff that eats up the ozone. Well, they're banning those, even though they're cheaper and less difficult to maintain than other inhalers called HFA inhalers. And CFCs from medical products are less than 0.5% of the total CFCs in the world. So it doesn't really have an impact. So poor people are again going to have to pay more and get an inferior product for what is essentially a symbolic environmental move. And lastly, the TSA decided that they were going to institute new rules for all large aircraft, not just passenger aircraft or commercial aircraft, but also business aircraft. So those commuter jets that companies own, well, they're going to be subjecting them to the no-fly list. They're also going to be banning all items that are prohibited on regular passenger planes are now going to be banned from corporate jets. And if I'm reading this right, from transport planes too. The companies are also going to have to pay for compliance audits at their own expense.
Now, you're saying, what's this have to do with Write the Laws Act? Is it these are all coming into power because Congress isn't voting on each one of these and someone else is? What's going on here?
Well, Congress essentially gave the TSA the authority to regulate aircraft and transport. Congress essentially gave the FDA the power to regulate food and drug purity and all kinds of testing standards. The problem is, Now the FDA comes up with its own rules. This rule was never voted on in Congress. A lot of people think that all of the federal laws that you have to follow were voted on by your representatives.
Well, they're supposed to be, aren't they?
Right, you're supposed to have representation
That's
in
Congress's
America.
job, and then the president either vetoes them or signs off on them. That's how things are supposed to work, right?
Right.
But they don't.
That's not how it works.
Well, let's make it work that way. You can help out by going to downsizedc.org and letting your voice be heard. They probably won't listen to you, but at least they know you're out there. All right, when we come back, we're going to be getting into some news about plastic bags. You know, if you live in India, you may go to jail if you want to use one, store one, or sell one. We're also going to be getting into some fun, exciting financial news and a whole lot more when we come back. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV. Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com. That's lyfproductions.com.
This is Will Buchanan. I walked 3,200 miles across the country to move to New Hampshire for liberty, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to the show. As always, it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Please take the time to log on to our website, freemindstv.com. From there, there's all the archives, ways you can help the show, and specifically right now, ways you can donate to the show. We're trying to create a new set. While this awesome background that's black and lit up is very nice, we would like it to be colorful and have cool stuff going on behind it. For that, we need your help. We're trying to raise $300 to make a brand new snazzy set so we can look like all those professional type shows. You can help out with that. Even $1 or $2 will help. You can do that over at freemindstv.com. And while you're at it, check out all the free stuff. There's a ton of stuff up there, all the archives, Free Minds Radio at freemindstv.com. All right, we've got more articles to get into. In fact, I think that we're going to have some bonus content today for the members section because we don't even have time for it all. We got to jump right into it. Let's go across the pond to where they're going to be nationalizing some European banks.
Well, essentially in England and Ireland, they're having the same essentially the same financial crisis that we're having here. The banks weren't doing very well, and there were a lot of fears that the banks were essentially going to go under, and that would cause a whole chain of problems for the economy. So the government, as I understand it in the UK, took some ownership stake in banks. They're doing the same thing in Ireland. And investors are dumping those stocks. Allied Irish shares are down 62%, Bank of Ireland 49%, this was last week, and a whole bunch of other British and Irish banks were down. Why? Well, investors are worried that the government is going to take over a good chunk of those companies. It was the same thing we saw here in the US with AIG. It sounds like a great idea having the government back up a bank, but usually they take ownership stock in it. When they do that, it dilutes the shares that are out there. They can arbitrarily reduce the value of the stock. People don't really trust the government to run a company, whether it's a bank or whatever it is. So they know that their stock value is going to drop. They're selling it now. Apparently, a lot of these nationalizations, semi-nationalizations, are going to go through in the spring. And of course, people are concerned that maybe the government could take them over entirely and turn them into what we have here in the US, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, essentially government-sponsored entities that aren't really businesses at all. So I can't really blame investors for dumping the stock. Of course, it's an unintended consequence for the government, because what they're trying to do is stop the economic crisis, try to improve the situation, but they're making it worse, because now that the government's getting involved, investors know that they should be dumping their stock. So it's one of those things where the government thinks it can offer a simple, quick, easy fix, but it screws it up.
Well, of course, they're politicians. I mean, would you buy some stock in the DMV if they were selling today? It's like, oh, DMV's offering stock. Let's get on down there and buy some because they're a great business. Well, government gets involved, they usually screw things up. So if I own stock in a company that was about to be taken over by the government, yeah, I'd probably be dumping that too, because chances are they're going to do a pretty poor job over there. But we've got to move on. We've got some more news that's coming out from here in the United States having to do with guns. We've been following as the new administration. We've got a new president now. It's really exciting. We're not going to talk about that because it's all over the news. But one thing this whole new wave of Democrats is doing is making people pretty nervous about guns. We've been reporting on that, and there's some new information coming out this week. What is it, Nick?
Well, there's one Democrat from Illinois. He's in the House of Representatives, and he's introduced a bill to create a national firearms registry, like they have they had one in Britain, but then they confiscated all the guns, so they don't have one anymore. They have one in Australia too, right before they confiscated all the guns, and people don't have guns anymore. It's House Resolution 45, and it was introduced by Representative Bobby Rush. Essentially, it's just going to it would create a registry. Thankfully, I hope they're going to back off of this. I don't think a lot of the New Democrats will want to touch the gun issue. It's a very divisive issue, and there are independents and Democrats who do care about gun rights too. So this is kind of like one of those issues you want to address at the end of your term, or I don't think they want to touch it right now. It would probably create a lot of divisions, and it would probably give the Republican side of the aisle, which is pretty weakened right now, a lot of ammunition, no pun intended.
But if this does go through, what it would mean is if you own a firearm, you've got to report it to the federal government, and they put it in their little database so that they know every citizen or every person who owns a gun. Of course, all the ones who were dumb enough to go and register them with the feds.
Yeah, I mean, Canada tried this too, and they haven't had confiscations yet. Canada is one of the few countries where they introduced a gun registry and then didn't grab all the guns yet.
But it makes it very easy for them to, at least from the law-abiding citizens, if they ever decide they want to confiscate the guns.
Sort of, if it works. You have to remember it's a government program. So even if they put it into place, if it works like Canada's worked, you would have something like 50% of firearms going unregistered.
Wow. Well, I mean, most people aren't going to register their guns. I mean, the people
well, at least half of the people in Canada didn't.
Well, the law-abiding citizens might register their guns, and
some of them will.
Some of them might, and the criminals definitely aren't going to register their guns. I mean, why would they? They're criminals. Why would they want the federal government to know where their guns are? So basically, you're picking off of the weakest of the weak people here, who need guns to defend themselves if there ever was a gun confiscation. But it's one of those catch-22 programs, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, most guns that are used in violent crime are stolen. I don't know if it's most. A good chunk of crime guns are stolen guns, and I think it is a majority, a vast majority. Very few are actually bought legitimately. Criminals rarely go to the gun store, fill out the government paperwork that already exists, and get their crime guns that way. That's just not how they operate. And a lot of violent criminals have criminal records, so they couldn't do it. So, and it's, in many cases, it's cheaper and easier to obtain, even if you can obtain a firearm, cheaper and easier in many places, like New York City, to obtain a firearm illegally. So why am I going to go into a legitimate gun store, pay $400, when I can buy that same model on the street when it's stolen for $150?
Well, these are your elected officials at work, and that's what you pay them to do, take away your rights. Well, it's easy to pick on America. We're always creating new bad laws. It's what we do, but we can't always stay here. We have listeners from all over the world and viewers from all over the world, so let's take it to India. I don't think we've ever been to India, Delhi specifically, where they are going to be banning the use of plastic bags. They've already banned those really, really thin plastic bags, but this time they're going after all of them. A new law that will be going into effect very shortly states that the use, storage, and sale of any plastic bags will be banned. People who still possess plastic bags, use plastic bags, sell plastic bags, have them in the grocery store. Even if you bring your own from home that you saved to the grocery store and have your groceries put on it, well, you could face a 100,000 rupee fine, which is equivalent to, I think, around $1,000, but don't quote me on that. I really don't know. I've never been to India. And possible jail time for people who simply are using plastic bags. Now, is this taking one of those feel-good laws way too far, Nick, or is this what we need to do to save the environment? We need to lock people up for the use of plastic bags.
I think it's probably one of those laws that goes too far. A lot of
Well, they tried it the easy way, Nick. They tried just banning the thin ones, and people didn't listen. So now they're going to go all out and actually lock people up if they disagree. The problem is you hear all kinds of different takes, and a lot of times the feel-good initiatives that they push through are not based on good science or good environmentalism in the first place. Even if you wanted to pass a law to control people's behavior, which I personally don't, you can make the argument that plastic is more recyclable than paper. That is true.
Paper, it takes a lot of chemicals to make paper. You're cutting down trees, which process the carbon out of the air, and it takes a lot of chemicals, as I understand it, to reprocess the paper. So
bad for you chemicals. We're talking
like chlorine
and stuff that's all going right back into the environment, and people still feel great about it. But as long as you feel good and you're locking people up for it. I guess that's great. At least it's going on in India. But you know, we've seen these plastic bag bans pop up all over the United States as well. California really likes them. And so it's not that far to think that we could be doing this kind of thing here in the United States as well.
California would be the first place, I think. All the bad things seem to come out. No offense to our viewers in California, but most of the bad nanny state things really do come out of California.
Yeah, we've got some more news about that with marijuana. We're going to be doing that in the bonus segment, but more bad news coming from California. But, you know, when they pass these laws in India, at least they're honest, and they say, you have a bag and it's plastic, even if you didn't just get it from the store, you saved it at home. If you're using that plastic bag, we're going to lock you up and charge you a whole lot of money. And in India, it's probably going to bankrupt you. At least they're honest over there. Here in America, when we pass the bag bans, it's just like, oh, don't worry about it, it'll be a small fine. Of course, if you don't pay that fine, like some people don't, you'll get locked up for it. So at least they're honest over in India. We couldn't quite get that here in the United States. But this nanny statism, Nick, it seems to be spreading globally now.
Yeah, and environmentalism, not that there's anything wrong with caring about the environment. I think we all want to have a clean environment. Environmentalism seems to be the hot button issue where people are pushing for all kinds of restrictions and trying to argue that we have to do it or we're all going to die because the ice caps will melt or the earth will be too polluted for us to live. To be honest, I kind of have doubts about that whole theory in and of itself, and I think the last couple of years have kind of thrown a monkey wrench in that science because the climate models are not predicting what's happening now. They failed to do that. And even if it was to some extent correct, the earth was getting a little bit warmer, I'm not sure how bad the impact would be in terms of on people's day-to-day lives in terms of the environmental impact compared to the alternative that we're going to. We're talking about carbon taxes. I've heard some American politicians and do-gooders talking about artificially taxing gasoline to keep the price at $3 or $4 all the time. When you think about the kind of economic impact that has and how many hours a day you're going to spend working to pay for gasoline to fight a problem that may not exist, it just seems like overkill.
Well, you know, Nick, I actually do care about the environment, and that's why I want the government to stay the hell out of it because, well, they're going to screw it up even more. Well, we're out of time today. We will have some bonus content. If you want to watch that, you can sign up for the members section. It has all the wicked old archives of the show, the first 55 episodes or so, as well as tons of bonus content. You can sign up $3 a month or $30 a year. You can do that at freemindstv.com. Log on to our website for all the old archives, ways to contact the show, and of course, we need a nice setback here. So if you want to help us out, give us $1 or $2. Well, they're curtains, they're nice and all, but we'd like more. And you can help out with only $1 or $2. Check it out, freemindstv.com. It's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great night.
This edition of whatever it is you're watching is brought to you by Ridley Report, something, Ridley Report. Ridley Report, something, Ridley Report.